The wolfsbane dissolved in his wine like a whispered promise of death. 3 years I'd waited for this moment, 3 years of scrubbing floors where my mother's blood had pooled, of bowing to the man who'd made me watch as my family burned. My hands didn't shake as I poured. They should have, because when Alpha King Koven Sunder drained the goblet that should have killed him in minutes, he smiled at me with those winter-grey eyes and said, "Exquisite, pour me another." And that's when I realised I hadn't poisoned him. I'd just shown a predator exactly where I'd hidden all my teeth. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but mine had been frozen for exactly 3 years, 2 months, and 17 days. That's how long it had been since Alpha King Koven Sunder stood in our family's great hall and declared my father a traitor. Since he'd ordered the executions carried out at dawn. Since he'd looked me in the eyes, 16 years old and screaming, and said, "Let her live. Let her remember." I remembered. Gods, how I remembered. Now I was Elara nobody, a shadow in servants' grey, invisible among the dozens who staffed the palace. I'd worked my way up from the kitchens through 3 years of perfect obedience, swallowed pride like poison every single day, until finally, they'd assigned me to serve at the Blood Moon Festival. The grand ballroom glittered with 1,000 candles. Alphas from every territory had gathered, dressed in silk and arrogance, celebrating another year of Koven Sunder's brutal reign. And there I stood, silver tray in hand, with a crystal decanter of his favourite wine. Wine I'd laced with enough wolfsbane to kill a dozen shifters. My heart hammered against my ribs as I approached the high table. Koven sat at its centre, devastatingly handsome in black and silver, his presence commanding the room, even in stillness. They called him the Winter King, the Unbroken, the man who'd unified the territories through blood and fear. I called him the man who'd murdered my family, Your Majesty. I kept my voice steady, my eyes downcast. Your wine. He barely glanced at me. I was nothing to him, just another servant, another nameless girl. He didn't recognize me. Why would he? Nobility looked different when scrubbing floors. I poured. He drank, and I waited for a king to die. Instead, he asked for more. That moment, watching him drain a goblet of poison like it was water, that's when everything I thought I knew shattered. But you can't understand the weight of that moment without knowing how I got there. Let me take you back to the beginning. Before we go back to where it all started, before I show you the night my world burned, do me a favour. If you're already hooked on this story, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. And drop a comment telling me what time you're watching and where you're watching from. I want to know who's riding this revenge journey with me. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, to the night I learned that monsters don't always look like monsters, and that sometimes the worst betrayals come wrapped in honour and duty. Let's go back 3 years, 2 months, and 17 days. To the night Alpha King Koven Sunder destroyed everything I loved. The soldiers came at midnight, as soldiers always do when they want to hide their shame in darkness. I was in the library when I heard the shouting. My father's voice, steady and commanding even then, echoed through the marble halls of our estate. "My daughter, she's just a child. Please, let me say goodbye." I ran. Gods, I ran so fast my slippers flew off on the grand staircase. But they'd already dragged him into our great hall, forced him to his knees. My mother stood beside him, chin raised in defiance, even as tears streamed down her face. My brother, Marcus, barely 14, struggled against the guards holding him back. And there, framed in the doorway like death itself, stood Alpha King Koven Sunder, Lord Thorn. His voice was winter itself, cold and absolute. You have been found guilty of treason against the crown. The penalty is death. Father! I screamed, fighting the guards who grabbed me. Father, no. My father's eyes found mine across that hall. Elara, my brave girl, remember. But they struck him then, and whatever he wanted me to remember died on his lips. I watched them burn. All three of them, tied to stakes in our own courtyard, while the household staff was forced to bear witness. My mother never screamed. Marcus called for me until the smoke took his voice, and my father kept his eyes on Koven Sunder until the very end, as if trying to communicate something the flames couldn't consume. When it was over, when the pyres had collapsed into ash and ember, Koven approached me. I was hollow by then, emptied of everything except hate. Let her live, he said to his guards, his winter-grey eyes boring into mine. Let her remember. And I did. Every single day for 3 years, 2 months, and 17 days, I started in the palace kitchens, hauling water and gutting fish alongside women who didn't ask questions about the girl who never spoke. I learned to be invisible, to blend into the background, like wallpaper. I studied the palace rotations, memorized the guard shifts, mapped every servant corridor and hidden passage. I learned about wolfsbane from the palace healer's discarded texts. How it attacked a shifter's wolf, burning through their system like liquid fire. How just a few drops could kill. I collected it, slowly, carefully. A pinch stolen here, a vial purchased there from a back-alley apothecary who didn't care what a servant girl wanted with poison. It took me 8 months to gather enough. Then I waited for my opportunity. The Blood Moon Festival was perfect. Chaos and celebration, visiting alphas from every territory, the king's attention divided among 100 political maneuvers. And when the head servant assigned me to the wine service for the high table, I knew the gods themselves had finally decided to be kind. I dressed in my cleanest servant's grey that evening, braided my dark hair tight against my skull. My hands trembled as I uncorked the wolfsbane vial in the wine cellar, watching the clear liquid dissolve into the deep red vintage like a secret. This is for you, Father, for Mother, for Marcus. The ballroom was a glittering obscenity. Alphas in silk and jewels, laughing and drinking, while somewhere in the city their subjects starved. And at the centre of it all, Koven Sunder held court like the tyrant he was. I approached his table with my tray, every step measured and perfect. My heart was a war drum in my chest, but my hands were steady. They had to be. Your Majesty, your wine. He barely looked at me. I was nothing to him, just another servant in an endless parade of faceless bodies that served his needs. He didn't recognize the girl who'd screamed his name 3 years ago. Why would he? That girl had died in a courtyard full of ash. I poured with a servant's practiced grace, filling his goblet to the perfect level. He lifted it to his lips, drank deep, and I watched, waiting for the moment his throat would close, for him to clutch at his chest as his wolf tore itself apart from the inside. I imagined him falling from his throne, choking on his own blood while his court watched helpless. Instead, he set down the empty goblet and turned those winter eyes on me. Exquisite, he said, a slight smile playing at his lips. Pour me another. My blood turned to ice. He shouldn't be breathing. He should be convulsing, dying, paying for what he'd done. But he just sat there, perfectly calm, perfectly alive, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. I poured again with numb fingers, my mind racing. Bad batch? Not enough? Impossible. I'd tested it on a wolf from the stables and watched the poor creature die in minutes. Koven drank the second goblet just as easily. Then, as I stood frozen, he leaned back in his chair and his eyes locked on mine with sudden, terrible focus. For one breathless moment, I thought he recognized me. The way his gaze sharpened, the slight tilt of his head. He was seeing me, truly seeing me for the first time. Then he turned away to address the visiting Alpha from the Eastern Territories, and I was dismissed. I retreated on shaking legs, my mind a storm of confusion and growing panic. Around me, I caught fragments of conversation, whispers about unrest in the southern reaches, about territories threatening to break their oaths, about the king's iron grip finally beginning to slip. But all I could think was, why isn't he dead? And worse, did he know what I'd done? I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my narrow cot in the servants' quarters, staring at the door and waiting for guards to come drag me to the dungeons. Every footstep in the corridor made my heart seize. Every raised voice was surely someone calling for my arrest. But dawn came, grey and cold, and I was still alive. I went through my morning duties in a daze. Hauling water, scrubbing floors, keeping my head down and my hands busy. Maybe he didn't know. Maybe I'd gotten away with it and just needed to try again, differently. Silver, perhaps. Or you, girl. I looked up to find the palace steward, Garrick Vane, staring down at me with his perpetually sour expression. My stomach dropped. Yes, sir? His Majesty has requested your presence in the throne room, now. The washrag slipped from my numb fingers. This was it. This was how I died, not in a blaze of vengeance, but on my knees in a throne room, begging for mercy I wouldn't receive. I followed Garrick through the palace in silence. The throne room doors loomed ahead, massive and carved with scenes of conquest. 2 guards pulled them open, and I stepped into the cavernous space. Koven sat on his throne of black stone and silver, looking every inch the Winter King. Morning light streamed through the high windows, catching on his dark hair and making those grey eyes almost luminous. Several members of his inner council stood nearby, advisors I recognized by sight, if not by name. "Ah," Koven said, and his voice echoed in the vast chamber. "There she is." I dropped into a curtsy, keeping my eyes on the floor. "Your Majesty." "What is your name, girl?" My throat closed. He didn't know. He couldn't know, or I'd already be in chains. "Elara, sire. Just Elara. Just Elara." He sounded amused. "Tell me, just Elara, how long have you served in my palace?" 3 years, Your Majesty. And last night was your first time serving at a formal event. Yes, sire. You have an excellent eye for wine service. The pour was perfect. The presentation flawless. He leaned forward slightly, and I felt his attention on me, like a physical weight. I was impressed. Confused terror swirled in my gut. What was happening? "Therefore," he continued, "I'm promoting you. Effective immediately. You will serve as my personal cupbearer." The words didn't make sense at first. Then they crashed over me like ice water. His personal cupbearer, meaning I would be near him constantly. At every meal, every meeting, every private moment. Close enough to study, to watch, to assess, close enough to catch if I tried anything again. Your Majesty is too kind, I managed, my voice barely steady. I am not kind, he said flatly. I am practical. You will attend me throughout the day, beginning with the midday council session. Garrick will provide you with appropriate attire. You're dismissed. I curtsied again and fled, my mind screaming. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Garrick provided me with a new uniform, still servant's grey, but finer fabric, better tailored. You represent the king now, he said with clear distaste. Try not to embarrass him. By midday, I stood in the small council chamber, a pitcher of wine in my hands and doom in my heart. Koven sat at the head of the table, discussing trade agreements with his advisers. I poured when gestured to, stood silent and still when not needed, and felt his eyes on me throughout. He was assessing me, studying every movement, every breath. Like a wolf watching a rabbit and deciding when to strike, the session dragged on for hours. My feet ached and my arms burned from holding the heavy pitcher, but I didn't dare move. Finally, mercifully, the advisers were dismissed. Koven gestured for me to refill his goblet. I approached on trembling legs, poured with careful precision. Leave us, he said to the guards at the door. No, 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 no. The guards left. The door closed with a sound like a coffin ceiling. We were alone. Koven took a slow sip of wine, his eyes never leaving my face. The silence stretched, thin and terrible, until I thought I might scream just to break it. Then he spoke, his voice conversational, almost friendly. I know what you put in my wine, Elara Thorn. The world stopped. My real name. He knew my real name. I don't. The denial died on my lips because he was smiling now, and it was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. Wolfsbane, he continued, setting down his goblet. Quite a lot of it, actually. Enough to kill a dozen shifters, I'd wager. He tilted his head. Tell me, did you really think you were the first to try? I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stare at him as my entire world crumbled. You have two choices, Koven said, leaning back in his chair with the casual air of someone discussing the weather. You can refuse this position, in which case I'll have you arrested and executed for attempted regicide. Or, his smile widened, sharp and cold, you can accept. Continue serving as my cupbearer, and keep trying to kill me if you like. Why? The word tore from me, raw and desperate. Why would you? Because it's entertaining, he said simply, and because I want to see what you'll do next. He picked up his goblet again, took another long drink. So, what will it be, Lady Thorn? Death? Or a game you cannot possibly win? I stood there, trapped between rage and terror, and knew I had no choice at all. I accept, I whispered. His smile was victory itself. Excellent. You're dismissed. I'll see you at dinner. I fled the council chamber and barely made it to an empty corridor before my legs gave out. I sank against the wall, gasping, my mind reeling. He knew. He'd known from the beginning. And instead of killing me, he'd pulled me close, made me his cupbearer, his pet assassin. This wasn't just a game. It was a hunt, and I had no idea which one of us was the prey. I lasted 4 days before I tried again. 4 days of standing at Koven's elbow like a decorative statue, pouring his wine, watching him drink it without fear. 4 days of his winter-grey eyes tracking my every movement, reading frustration in the set of my shoulders, amusement dancing at the corners of his mouth. He was playing with me, and I hated how much he was enjoying it. So when the kitchen staff prepared his midday meal, roasted quail with blackberry reduction, I volunteered to bring it to his study myself. The cook looked surprised but didn't argue. I was the king's cupbearer now. I had access. The nightshade went into the reduction so smoothly it might have been meant to be there. Just 3 drops. Enough to stop a shifter's heart within the hour. I carried the tray through the palace corridors, my pulse hammering but my hands steady. This would work. It had to work. Koven was at his desk when I entered, reviewing documents. He glanced up, unsurprised. Ah, lunch. How thoughtful. I set the tray before him, arranged everything just so, stepped back to my position by the wall. He ate slowly, methodically, cutting precise pieces of meat. I watched each bite disappear, counting seconds in my head, waiting for him to cough, to clutch his chest, to finally pay for what he'd done. Instead, he dabbed his mouth with a napkin and said, "The reduction is excellent. There's an almost bitter undertone that complements the sweetness perfectly." His eyes found mine. Wouldn't you say? My jaw clenched so hard it ached. He laughed, actually laughed, and pushed the plate away. "Come here, Elara." It wasn't a request. I crossed the study on numb legs. "How are you doing this?" The words burst from me, all pretense of civility abandoned. The wolfsbane should have killed you. The nightshade should have stopped your heart. How are you still breathing? Koven stood, and suddenly he was very close. Too close. I could smell winter pine and something darker, could see the exact grey of his eyes and the small scar along his jaw. Would you like to know the secret to surviving when everyone wants you dead? He didn't wait for my answer. He began unbuttoning his shirt. I stepped back, but he caught my wrist. Not hard, but firm. "Look!" He pulled the fabric aside, revealing his chest. And I saw them. Scars. Dozens of them. Thin white lines crisscrossing his skin like a map of pain. Some were clearly old, faded to barely visible marks. Others were newer, still slightly raised. "Wolfsbane," he said, tracing one scar. "Nightshade, silver dust, hemlock, deathcap mushroom, aconite." His finger moved from scar to scar. I've consumed them all in measured doses, small amounts at first, gradually increasing over years. My breath caught. "You poisoned yourself." "I built immunity," he corrected. "When you have as many enemies as I do, Lady Thorn, immunity becomes survival." He released my wrist and rebuttoned his shirt. "I started 7 years ago. Do you know what happened 7 years ago?" I did the math. "Went cold. My family's execution." "Very good." He returned to his desk, poured himself wine from the decanter I'd brought earlier. Unpoisoned wine, because I'd learned my lesson there. That's when I realized how easy it would be for someone to kill me. How vulnerable a king truly is. He took a sip, so I made myself invulnerable. My one weapon, my only chance at justice, completely, utterly useless. He watched realization crash over me, and something flickered in his expression. Almost like sympathy. Almost. "You're not the first of your family to try to kill me," he said quietly. "You're just the least subtle." The words didn't make sense. "What?" "Your father." Koven set down his goblet with careful precision. He tried to poison me 3 times before I had him executed. "Did you know that?" The floor tilted beneath my feet. You're lying. I have the evidence if you'd like to see it. Bottles found in his study, letters from apothecaries, testimony from servants. His voice was matter-of-fact, but his eyes were sharp, watching my reaction. Of course, you were just a child. Perhaps he kept his murderous intentions from you. My father was innocent. The words tore from my throat. He was good and honourable, and you killed him for nothing. Did I? Koven tilted his head. Or did he betray his king and die for it? I lunged for him without thinking. Stupid, suicidal, but 3 years of rage erupted from me in that moment. I wanted to claw those winter eyes from his face. Wanted to make him hurt, the way he'd made my family hurt. He caught both my wrists easily, spun me, pinned me against the desk. His chest pressed against my back, his breath hot against my ear. There she is, he murmured, the real Elara Thorn. Not the meek servant or the patient poisoner. Just rage and grief wrapped in a girl's skin. I hate you, I gasped. I hate you so much. I know. He released me suddenly, stepped back. You may go. I fled his study, his words chasing me down the corridor. You're not the first of your family to try to kill me. It couldn't be true. My father had loved his king, had served him faithfully for years. He wouldn't have, but I'd seen the scars, seen the truth in Koven's eyes. What if everything I thought I knew was a lie? I couldn't sleep. Again, the palace library was deserted at this hour, moonlight streaming through tall windows and turning everything silver. I moved through the stacks like a ghost, searching. The official records were kept in locked cases, but locks had never stopped me. 3 years of surviving as a servant had taught me useful skills. The case opened with barely a click. I found my family's trial documents within minutes. Read them by candlelight, my hands trembling. The accusations were detailed, specific. Lord Aldrich Thorm had allegedly sold territorial defence plans to enemy pacts in the eastern reaches, had accepted payment in gold and promises of land, had been caught when an intercepted letter revealed his treachery. But something was wrong. The handwriting in the evidence letters didn't match my father's. I'd seen his correspondence my whole life. He had distinctive script, slightly left-slanted. These letters were too neat, too perfect. Interesting reading. I spun, nearly dropping the documents. Koven stood in the doorway, dressed in sleep clothes and a loose robe. He looked younger like this, almost human. I couldn't sleep, I stammered. Neither could I. He crossed to where I stood, glanced at the papers in my hands. Finding what you're looking for? These letters aren't my father's handwriting. No, Koven agreed. They're not. I stared at him. You know they're forged? I suspected. He took the documents from me, studied them with detached interest. But suspicion isn't proof. And without proof, I had no choice but to follow the evidence presented. You killed an innocent man on forged evidence. I executed a convicted traitor on the evidence my counsel provided. His voice was cold now. There's a difference. Not to the people who died. I wanted to scream, to rage, but we were in a library and somehow that demanded quiet. Not to me. Something shifted in his expression. He set the documents aside, leaned against the table. Come, walk with me. It wasn't a request. I followed him through the silent palace, through corridors I'd never seen. We ended up in a private garden, enclosed by high walls and full of night-blooming flowers. Why keep me alive? I asked finally. If you know what I am, what I want, why this game? Because I want to know who sent you. No one sent me. I came for vengeance. He actually laughed at that. Bitter and knowing. Did you? Tell me, Elara, how did a 16-year-old girl with no connections, no money, no skills, manage to secure a position in the palace? How did you just happen to work your way up to serving at the exact event where you'd have access to me? How did you acquire wolfsbane when it's nearly impossible to obtain? I opened my mouth, closed it. The old apothecary who'd sold me the poison. The head servant who'd assigned me to the festival, the convenient series of promotions. Someone paved your way, Koven said softly. Someone wanted you exactly where you ended up. The question is why. Before I could respond, voices echoed from the palace. Koven tensed, moved closer to me. A moment later, a group of men emerged into the garden, visiting alphas from the Eastern Territories, and they were drunk. Well, well, one of them drawled, catching sight of us. The Winter King, and a pretty little servant. His eyes raked over me. She's a bit thin for my taste, but in the dark, you'll address her with respect. Koven's voice could have frozen blood. Or you'll address me with steel. The Alpha laughed, but there was nervousness in it. Protective of your servants, are we? How noble. Protective of what's mine. Koven's hand settled on my shoulder, possessive and warning. And she is mine. The message was clear. The Alphas muttered and moved on, their footsteps fading. I pulled away from Koven's touch. I'm not yours. To them, you are. Unless you'd prefer I let them have you. He raised an eyebrow. I can call them back. I said nothing. That's what I thought. He turned to leave, then paused. One more thing, Elara. Did you ask yourself why we're at war with the Eastern Reaches? The same territories your father allegedly sold secrets to? I frowned. What are you saying? I'm saying start asking better questions. He disappeared into the shadows. And watch Councillor Roan Hallow. Watch him very carefully. I stood alone in the garden as pieces of a puzzle I didn't understand began to shift in my mind. Nothing made sense anymore. My father's handwriting, the convenient path to revenge, the war in the East, and Koven's expression when he'd said, "Watch Roan Hallow." What if the monster I'd sworn to kill wasn't the real enemy? What if I'd been hunting the wrong man all along? I found the palace healer 3 days later in his workshop that smelled of herbs and something darker. Stellan Varkas looked up from his mortar and pestle, unsurprised to see me. Ah, the cupbearer. His voice was dry, clinical. I wondered when you'd find your way here. He was older than I'd expected, perhaps 50, with silver threading through dark hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Scars marked his hands. Chemical burns, I realized. The marks of his trade. You're the one, I said. The one who's been helping him. Helping who do what? But there was knowing in his tone. Don't play games. You've been poisoning the king. Stellan smiled faintly. Poisoning is such an ugly word. I prefer building immunity. He set down his pestle. But yes, for 7 years now, I've been carefully administering controlled doses of various toxins to His Majesty. Wolfsbane, nightshade, silver dust, hemlock, all the classics. Why? Because he asked me to. Stellan moved to a cabinet, withdrew a leather-bound journal. Started right after the Thorn execution, actually. Came to me in the middle of the night, demanded I help him become immune to every poison known to shifters. The timeline clicked into place like a key turning in a lock. He started after my family died. Yes. Stellan opened the journal, showed me pages of careful notes, dates, dosages, reactions, told me he'd realized how vulnerable he was, how easy it would be for someone to slip something into his food or wine. He traced a finger down one page. He was right to worry. 17 assassination attempts in 7 years. The number stole my breath. 17 that we know of. Stellan turned pages, showing me incident reports. Poisoned wine at a treaty signing from the northern reaches. Tainted meat at a harvest festival. Source unknown. Nightshade in his bath, oils. Traced to a servant bribed by the Eastern Territories. Page after page of attempts. Different methods, different sources, but all aimed at one target. Someone's been trying very hard to kill him. Stellan said quietly. Multiple someones, actually. But here's what's interesting. He pulled out another document, this one covered in his cramped handwriting. I started tracking patterns. The attempts increased after certain political decisions, after he denied territorial expansion to certain nobles, after he blocked specific trade agreements. I scanned the notes, saw names I recognized, lords and alphas from the court, and one name that appeared again and again. Roan Hallow. The council wants him dead. I breathed. Someone does. Stellan reclaimed his journal. And they've been very creative about it. Hiring assassins, bribing servants, manipulating circumstances, his eyes fixed on me, making it very easy for a grieving girl to get exactly where she needed to be to strike at the king. Rage flared hot in my chest. I chose this. No one made me. Did you? Stellan's voice was gentle but pitying. Tell me, girl, how did you get your position in the palace? I applied after my family died. They needed kitchen staff. Who interviewed you? I frowned, thinking back. A woman. I don't remember her name. And who promoted you from the kitchens? The head servant. Garrick Vane, who reports directly to Councillor Roan Hallow. Stellan let that sink in. And who assigned you to serve at the Blood Moon Festival? My throat went dry. Garrick. And where did you acquire the wolfsbane? An apothecary in the lower city. He didn't ask questions. I stopped, heard how it sounded. You think he was planted there, waiting for me. I think someone made it very, very easy for you to become exactly what you became. Stellan's expression was almost kind. You're not special, girl. You're just the latest weapon someone else pointed at the king. No, but my voice lacked conviction. I wanted revenge. That was real. I'm sure it was. Grief and rage are powerful motivators, perfect for manipulation. He began cleaning his workspace. They gave you a target, provided the means, cleared the path. All you had to do was walk it. I backed toward the door, my world tilting sideways. Every step of my journey, every convenient coincidence. The apothecary who sold poison without questions. The job opening that appeared exactly when I needed it. The promotions that came just fast enough to keep hope alive. He knows, I said suddenly. Koven knows someone's using me. Of course he does. Why do you think he kept you close instead of executing you? Stellan's smile was grim. He's waiting to see who's really pulling your strings. I fled his workshop, my mind screaming. 3 years. 3 years I'd spent planning, preparing, nursing my hatred. 3 years I'd thought I was in control of my own revenge. What if I'd never been in control at all? I found Koven in his private study after sunset, staring at a map of the territories marked with coloured pins. Red for hostile, blue for allied, black for uncertain. There was more red than blue. Who made it easy for me? I didn't bother with formalities. You said to watch Roan Hallow. Why? Koven turned from his map. He looked tired in the candlelight, older than his years. Close the door. I did. Stood with my back against it, arms crossed, waiting. The Shadow Council, he said finally. 5 nobles who've held real power in this kingdom for generations. The king is just their puppet. His laugh was bitter. I didn't know that when I took the throne. Thought I was actually ruling. Then they ordered me to execute your father. The floor dropped from beneath me. Ordered. Lord Aldrich Thorne discovered their corruption. Embezzlement, territory manipulation, conspiracy to start wars for profit. Koven moved to his desk, pulled out a hidden drawer. He brought the evidence to me. Thought I'd help him expose them, and you killed him instead. They gave me a choice. His voice was flat, emotionless. Execute him on fabricated treason charges, or they'd rally their allied territories and plunge the kingdom into civil war. Thousands would die. The kingdom would tear itself apart. He met my eyes. I chose to kill one man instead of thousands. I wanted to scream, to rage, to hate him cleanly and simply, like I had for 3 years. But the complexity of it twisted in my gut like poison. You still gave the order. Yes, no excuses, no justification. I gave the order, but they held the knife. You could have fought them. With what army? They control the lords, the territories, the coin. He gestured to the map. I've been investigating them for 7 years, since your family's execution. That's when I realized I wasn't a king. I was a prisoner wearing a crown. Evidence scattered across his desk. Letters, ledgers, testimony. Years of careful documentation. This doesn't change anything, I said, but my voice shook. You murdered my family. I did. Koven's winter eyes held mine. And I've regretted it every day since. But regret doesn't bring them back. Action might avenge them. What action? Help me destroy the council. Expose them. Bring them down for what they did to your family and everyone else. They've manipulated. My laugh was sharp, painful. You want me to help you. After everything. The window shattered. I saw the arrow. Saw it flying straight for Koven's chest. Saw my own death 3 years ago reflected in its silver tip. Then Koven slammed into me, drove us both to the floor. The arrow meant for him buried itself in his shoulder with a wet, terrible sound. Stay down. He rolled off me, shouted for guards. Blood bloomed across his shirt. Too much blood. The arrow had silver fletching, meant to prevent healing, to make the wound mortal. Guards poured in, but the assassin was already gone. I pressed my hands against Koven's shoulder, trying to stop the bleeding. My hands came away red. Why? The word tore from me. Why did you? Because you remind me. His voice was fading, grey eyes losing focus. You remind me why I'm still fighting. His head fell back. Blood pulsed between my fingers, hot and too fast. No. I pressed harder. No, you don't get to die. Not before you answer for what you did. Not before. My voice broke. Guards, "Get the healer!" Stellan appeared, moved me aside with gentle firmness, began working on the wound with swift efficiency. I stood there, shaking, staring at my bloody hands. Koven had taken an arrow meant for him, had shielded me with his own body. The man who'd killed my family had just saved my life, and I didn't know whether to weep or scream or set the whole palace on fire. I sat beside Koven's bed for 3 days, told myself it was to watch him, to make sure he didn't die before I decided whether I wanted him dead. The truth was more complicated, and I hated it. Stellan worked over him with quiet efficiency, removing the silver-tipped arrow, cleaning the wound, applying poultices that smelled of herbs and something sharper. The king drifted in and out of consciousness, fever burning through him as his body fought the silver poisoning. On the 3rd day, Stellan found me in the corner chair where I'd been keeping vigil. "The arrow," he said, without preamble. I traced its origins. I sat up straighter and, commissioned from a Fletcher in the eastern city, paid for by a merchant account. His expression was grim. An account controlled by Councillor Roan Hallow. The pieces clicked into place with terrible clarity. He tried to kill us both. "The council knows who you are," Stellan confirmed. "They've known all along. They facilitated your position in the palace, made sure you had access to the king, provided the means for assassination." He pulled out a document, handed it to me. "This is a warrant for your execution, pre-signed and dated, ready to be enacted the moment Koven died by your hand." My hands shook as I read it. Treason. Regicide. Death by burning. Same as my family. "You were never going to survive this," Stellan said quietly, "whether you succeeded or failed. If you'd killed him, you'd have been executed as a traitor. If you failed and he discovered you, he'd have executed you himself. Either way, 2 threats to the council eliminated. A weapon, a patsy, a tool to be discarded once its purpose was served." "They used my grief," I whispered. "My rage. Used it like a blade. And when that blade proved too dull, they tried a more direct approach." Stellan gestured to Koven's still form. "The arrow was meant for him, but if it had killed you instead, just as effective." Behind us, Koven stirred. His eyes opened, fever bright but lucid. "You're awake," I said, and hated how relief flooded my voice. Hard to sleep with all this talking. His voice was rough. He tried to sit up, winced. "The council knows everything," Stellan said, "about her, about your investigation. They're moving against you." Koven's jaw tightened. "Then we move first." His winter eyes found mine. "Work with me. Destroy them. I can't just forget. I'm not asking you to forget." He struggled upright, ignored Stellan's protests. "I'm asking you to aim your rage at the right target. The people who killed your family, who used you, who've been puppeting this kingdom for decades." His voice was fierce despite his weakness. "Help me cut their strings." I wanted to refuse, wanted to cling to my comfortable hatred, but comfortable lies were what had brought me here in the first place. "Show me," I said. "Show me everything." Koven sent Stellan to retrieve documents from a hidden safe. When the healer returned, he spread evidence across the bed. Letters detailing the council's corruption, ledgers showing embezzlement, testimony from witnesses too afraid to speak publicly, and there, at the bottom of the pile, a leather journal in familiar handwriting. My father's journal. My hands trembled as I opened it. saw his careful documentation of the council's crimes, his plans to expose them, his final entry, written the night before his arrest. If you're reading this, Koven, I am already dead. The council moves against me. I've hidden the evidence. You know where. Promise me 2 things. Protect my daughter and finish what I started. Don't let them win. He gave this to you. I breathed. The night before his execution. Koven's voice was heavy, made me swear. Both promises. Then why? The question tore from me. Why let me suffer for 3 years? Why let me think you were the monster? Pain flickered across his face. Because I couldn't find you. After the execution, you vanished. I searched, Elara. I searched everywhere. Sent men to every city, every territory. Your family had distant relatives, but none had seen you. It was like you'd disappeared from the kingdom entirely. I remembered those first months. Running, hiding, terrified they'd come to finish what they'd started. I only knew you'd returned when you tried to poison me, Koven continued. I recognized you the moment you approached my table, saw my best friend's eyes staring at me from his daughter's face. His voice cracked. I thought you were dead, and then there you were, trying to kill me with wolfsbane. You could have told me the truth then. Would you have believed me? He laughed bitterly. You wanted me dead, needed me dead. The truth would have sounded like lies. He was right. I would have thought it manipulation, another cruelty. My father trusted you, I said slowly. Enough to give you his life's work. Enough to ask you to protect me. And I failed him. Koven's winter eyes held mine. Let me stop failing him. Let me finish what he started. I looked at the evidence spread before us, at my father's journal, at the warrant for my execution signed by men who'd used my grief as a weapon. The rage that had sustained me for 3 years still burned. But now it had a true target. What's the plan? I asked. The next Blood Moon Festival was 3 weeks away. We had 3 weeks to gather every piece of evidence, secure every witness, plan every detail of the council's exposure. 3 weeks working side by side with the man I'd sworn to kill. It was easier than it should have been. Koven thought like my father had, methodical, strategic, seeing 10 steps ahead. We worked late into the nights, mapping out the council's web of corruption, identifying their allies, their resources, their weaknesses. And somewhere in those long nights, something shifted between us. The hatred was still there, but beneath it, something else grew. Understanding, maybe. Or recognition. We were both prisoners of the same system, both playing parts in someone else's game. You fight like your father did, Koven said one night, watching me debate strategy. Same fierce intelligence, same refusal to back down. You knew him well. He was my closest friend. Pain flickered across his face. Losing him, it broke something in me, made me realize I'd been blind to what was happening in my own kingdom. I wanted to hate him for that admission. Couldn't quite manage it anymore. 2 weeks before the festival, Stellan burst into Koven's study, where we were working. Roan knows, he gasped. He knows about the plan. We'd been too slow, too careful, too late. The attack came that night. I was in my quarters when I heard the screams. Palace guards turning on each other, steel ringing in corridors. I grabbed the knife I'd started keeping beneath my pillow and ran toward Koven's chambers. Found him in the council room, surrounded. a dozen guards with drawn swords, and at their head, Counsellor Roan Hallow with a smile like poisoned honey. "Your Majesty," Roan purred. What a shame. The poor king, murdered by his vengeful cupbearer. We tried to save you, of course, but she was too quick. "Original," Koven said dryly. His hand was on his sword. "Did it take all 5 of you to come up with that plan? Mock all you like, you'll be dead in minutes." Roan gestured. "Kill him. Make it look like a struggle." The guards advanced. I slipped into the room behind them, knife in hand, caught the nearest guard in the kidney before he knew I was there. He went down screaming. "Hello, Roan," I said. "Remember me?" Chaos erupted. Koven and I moved together like we'd trained for this, anticipating each other's strikes, covering each other's blind spots. He was still weak from the arrow wound, but fury made him fierce. I was small and fast, and fueled by 3 years of rage finally aimed at the right target. We were good, but there were too many. A blade caught Koven across the ribs. He stumbled. A guard moved in for the kill. I had a choice. Let him die. Escape in the confusion. Finally get the revenge I'd wanted for so long. Or save him. "You don't get to die before we finish this." I drove my knife into the guard's throat, caught Koven before he fell. His blood was hot against my hands. Again, always again. "Touching," Rome sneered, but futile. Then the doors burst open. Stellan, leading a group of loyal guards. Behind them, lords and ladies we'd secretly recruited to our cause. Witnesses, with evidence ready to testify. The tide turned. Roan's bought guard surrendered or fled. The counsellor himself tried to run, but Koven caught him by the throat. "You killed my best friend," Koven said quietly. "Used his daughter as a weapon. Tried to turn me into a puppet." His grip tightened. "I am done being manipulated." We dragged them into the great hall, all 5 council members, bound and terrified. As dawn broke, we displayed the evidence for all to see. Letters, ledgers, testimony, proof of decades of corruption. Koven stood before his court, bloodied but unbroken. "I have been a king in chains," he declared. "No more. These men orchestrated treason, murdered innocents, and manipulated this kingdom for their own profit. Lord Aldrich Thorm died trying to expose them. His daughter nearly died as their weapon. It ends now. The council fell, arrested, their territories stripped, their corruption laid bare, and my family's name was cleared, declared heroes who died fighting corruption. I stood in that hall where my father had been condemned, and I wept. Not for revenge anymore, for justice. Finally, the kingdom didn't heal overnight. Corruption that deep leaves scars that take years to fade. But we were trying. A new council formed. Lords and ladies chosen for competence rather than connections. Commoners elevated for their wisdom rather than their wealth. The territories slowly reorganized, finding their footing in a kingdom that was finally, tentatively, becoming what it should have been all along. 2 months after the blood moon reckoning, Koven summoned me to his private study. I found him standing by the window, looking out over the city, and something in his posture reminded me painfully of my father. "I've been thinking," he said without turning, "about your family's estate, your title, everything that was stripped from you." He turned then, winter eyes serious. "I want to restore it all. Lady Elara Thorn, with all rights and privileges befitting your station. The offer should have filled me with triumph. Vindication. Everything I'd lost returned. Instead, I felt nothing but a strange emptiness. No, I said quietly. He blinked. No, I'm not that girl anymore. I moved to stand beside him at the window. The one who lived in a manor and wore silk dresses and thought the world was simple. I don't want to be her again. Then who are you? I considered the question, thought about the servant who'd scrubbed floors and plotted murder, the weapon someone else had sharpened, the girl who'd chosen truth over comfortable lies. Someone who chooses truth over revenge, I said finally. Someone who finishes what her father started. Someone who refuses to look away from hard things. Koven studied my face. Stay, he said, and there was something vulnerable in his voice. Help me rebuild this. Not as a noble returning to her station. As yourself, whatever that means. On my terms, I said immediately. No more secrets, no more puppet kings, no more convenient lies. Agreed. He held out his hand. Partners? I took it. His grip was warm, steady. Partners. That evening, he had a private dinner prepared. Just the two of us in his study, away from the court's watchful eyes. Simple food, good wine, candlelight that softened the edges of the room. I poured the wine myself. Old habit, but my hands didn't shake, and the vintage was pure. He noticed. Of course he noticed. A slight smile touched his lips as he lifted the goblet. Not even a little poison, he asked. I'm almost disappointed. I'm saving it for special occasions. He laughed, a real laugh, unguarded, and drank, set down the goblet and met my eyes. Trust is more terrifying than poison. Then it's a good thing we're both brave, I said, and meant it. We talked long into the night, about the kingdom, about my father, about the weight of choices made in impossible moments. We didn't shy away from the hard truths between us. He had given the order that killed my family, and that would always be there. But beneath that terrible fact was something more complicated. He'd been as trapped as I was, both of us caught in the council's web, both of us trying to survive. What existed between us now wasn't simple, wasn't quite forgiveness, and wasn't quite friendship. Not yet lovers, though something pulled taut in the air when our eyes met. It was something forged in fire and blood and shared purpose. Something earned through choosing each other when we could have chosen destruction. I still hate you sometimes, I admitted as the candles burned low. I know, he didn't flinch from it. I hate myself for it too. But I'm glad you're alive. So am I. His slight smile was sad and real. Your father would be proud of you, Elara, of who you've become. The words cracked something open in my chest. I reached across the table, took his hand. Then let's make sure we're worth his sacrifice. The kingdom was broken, but we were learning how to heal it, piece by careful piece. And I had finally found something stronger than revenge, something more sustaining than hatred. Purpose, truth, and the terrifying, fragile beginning of trust. It wasn't the ending I'd imagined when I'd first poisoned his wine, but it was the one I chose, and that made all the difference. Thank you so much for watching this story unfold. If you enjoyed Elara and Koven's journey from vengeance to partnership, please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss our next tale. And I want to hear from you. If you were Elara, could you have forgiven Koven for what he did? Or Would revenge always come first, no matter the truth? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I love seeing how differently people would handle impossible choices. Until next time, remember, sometimes the monsters we hunt aren't the real enemy. And sometimes the hardest thing is choosing truth, when lies feel so much safer. See you in the next story.